My fellow Americans, under this current administration, we had never been closer to World War III than we have right now in this entire decade. Since 2020, it is only in the midpoint of the decade, in 2025, that we have been closest to World War III. If you didn't know, there is a proxy conflict between Israel and Iran, but there's a bigger game at play here, and that's what I'm going to try to show you here. So if you look here, we have, let me bring the camera closer. We have the USA, we have the EU, and we have right here, Israel. Follow that line down, it says occupied Palestine, Israel. And then over here, we have the UAE, or no, that's Saudi Arabia, and here we have the UAE. They're both on the Arabian Peninsula. Follow those labels out, Saudi, UAE. The EU, USA, UAE, Israel. So I'm going to be right back. I have to let my cat out. And remember this. Right. What are these countries? Let's write them down right here. So we have, can you see? Good. USA, Israel, or occupied Palestine. You know the terminology, either way I say it. We have Saudi Arabia, and then UAE. This is one cluster in this larger game being played here. Let's call this what it's called. This is the axis of tyranny. This cluster is called the axis of tyranny. What do these countries have in common? First of all, they have Western civilization in common. This is the West. Where did Western civilization begin if you study it in school? It starts with Babylon in Iraq, near the Middle East. Starts with Babylon, and then Mesopotamia, which is part of that, ancient Egypt, ancient Rome, ancient Greece, and then it continues moving westward. Western civilization continues moving westward from the EU, and now we're at USA as the seat of Western civilization. So this is all, that's what they have in common. They have Western civilization in common. And the other thing they have in common is Abrahamic faith. These people claim to follow the prophet Abraham, peace be upon him. We have a Jewish ethno-state. We have in some ways, Christian nationalist state. I wouldn't categorize the USA as a Christian national state at all, but there are elements of Christianity baked into the politics of this country. And then we have Saudi Arabia, which is Muslim, Abrahamic, of course, UAE, which is Muslim. But you can claim to be an adherent of a religion and not follow it properly, or go against its tenets and values. So this is the axis of tyranny. This was not always the axis of tyranny, by the way. This used to be the axis of freedom, of hope, of increased technology. That's where we used to be at. And now we've become the villains. We've become the bad guys in history. History will not record the axis of tyranny favorably at this point in time. And that can change, but in order for that to change, we have to change the leadership. It's that simple, actually. Simple, but not easy. Change the leadership of the axis of tyranny, and that starts with the USA, because these are all led by the USA. The rest of these are extension states or proxy states of the United States. Of course, they have their own interests, but ultimately, the US is the leader here. Now let's get into these other countries. Who do we have here? We have the main aggressor, besides Israel, in this proxy conflict, which is Iran. Who are its allies? We have China and Russia. What's this? The axis of tyranny is something I named and coined. But the axis of resistance is what these guys call themselves. The axis of resistance is the name for Iran here, and then the Houthis in Yemen, down south in the Arabian Peninsula, and then Hezbollah up north of Israel in like the Levantine area of Lebanon. That's called the axis of resistance. What I've just done is I've internationalized and globalized the term axis of resistance, and now I'm including China and Iran. So we have, if you can see, Iran, Russia, China. What is this? This is the axis of resistance. Axis of resistance. Now what you'll see is I drew these three countries much further apart than the first four. And that's on purpose. Oh, I realized on axis of tyranny, I forgot to add EU. But you know it's there. The European Union is very much part of this whole coalition, the axis of tyranny. But the axis of resistance, I drew Iran, Russia, and China very much further apart to each other than the axis of tyranny. And the reason for that is I explained how the axis of tyranny has Western civilization and Abrahamic faith in common. The axis of resistance doesn't have much in common at all. They don't really stand for anything. Iran is a fascist regime. Russia is a dictatorship pretending to be a democracy, and the same is the case for China. I don't mind, me personally, that doesn't bother me. If you're gonna be like a monarch, that's fine. Just call yourself a monarch. But don't call yourself a democracy. That's being fake, dishonest, disingenuous. For example, with the examples of Saudi Arabia and UAE, they overtly, we know that they're monarchies, so that's fine. But if you're Russia and China, what is this? You're either a democracy or you're not. Don't pretend. Don't try to have your cake and eat it too. So where I was going with that was, let's look at the ancient civilizations here. Ancient China. Ancient China doesn't really identify with anything else. It's very much rooted in itself because it's so ancient, and China has always been China. You know what I mean? With USA, it's like USA identifies with ancient Rome, ancient Greece, Christendom. Same thing with EU. They have that heritage, ancient Rome, Christendom, Napoleon, the Allied powers in World War II. So EU has a broader history. But China has always been China for all of history. Iran has always been Persia, ancient Persia. Even though the religion may change, the ideology may change from Zoroastrianism to eventually Islam, but then they became a nation state. They were no longer part of, a united Islamic nation, which at one point there was several times in history. Russia has always been Russia, right? It was never anything else. Where the USA was colonies, the USA was native nation states like the Iroquois Confederacy. So they are very much rooted in themselves. They don't have much in common. So why are they united? Why is there an axis of resistance? There's an axis of resistance because they're resisting tyranny. They're resisting tyranny. But much like the example of Hamas and Israel, when you resist tyranny with your own tyranny, perhaps a lesser evil, then it's not going to be received well by the public. That's what we're seeing with the axis of resistance. And that's why I said before that we should be changing the leadership of the axis of tyranny rather than, hoping in the victory of the axis of resistance, because this has its own tyranny. Russia has its issues with its Muslims in Chechnya and Dagestan. China mistreats the Uyghurs in East Turkestan. Iran has, its own issues, of course. So the real conflict in the area, and just for context, our country might be approaching war because of Iran's desire to, or perceived desire to develop nuclear weapons. So we know Israel has nuclear weapons. We know Israel is the aggressor in the area. it interferes with several other countries in the area, and Iran's main objective in being hostile towards Israel is the safety and security of the Palestinian people. And while the elites are in support of Zionism, the common man and the common woman know that it's a form of fascism, it's a form of apartheid, and it's genocide. So it's completely not okay at all. So the better thing to do is to change the leadership of the axis of tyranny, to have better politicians in the US, better presidents, better politicians at the local level, especially. And that will send positive reverberations throughout the world, and especially these three areas, these proxy states. So we can transform the axis of tyranny we can turn this into the axis of piety, the axis of piety, the axis of justice, the axis of morality. That's what it can be. So don't give up hope. Don't lose hope at all. Things can definitely change here. But with the axis of resistance, all it's doing is it's standing against the global hegemony and the dominance of the axis of tyranny. That's what it stands against. But what does it stand for? The axis of resistance, it doesn't stand for anything. And when you only stand against something and you don't stand for something, you can never win. Because once what you stand against is gone, there's chaos, there's power vacuum. It's completely unacceptable. So we just want to change the axis of tyranny into the axis of piety. Now let's get specific. Let's talk about Iran and its nuclear capability. Bibi Netanyahu has been saying for 2 decades, that's 20 years, more or less, that Iran is months away from nuclear weapons. Iran is weeks away from nuclear weapons. We all remember that stupid clip of him with the cartoon bomb, showing like, oh, if Iran gets to 90%